I stood in the reception hall of my palace, surrounded by my trusted advisors, watching as a weary traveler was brought before me. The man's dust-covered robes and exhausted demeanor told the story of a long, desperate journey. As King Porus of the flourishing city of Vardhamana, I had grown accustomed to receiving visitors from distant lands, but something in this man's eyes spoke of urgent matters. "O Radiant One," the traveler said, bowing deeply before my throne, "I have walked without rest through mountains and deserts." I leaned forward, studying his weathered face. The man's hands trembled slightly, whether from exhaustion or fear. I could not tell. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me and helps me keep writing new stories for you. Thank you for your support. But no matter how I hastened, he continued, I could not outrun disaster by more than 10 days. When this time passes, and countless army will approach your borders, led by the invincible Alexander, king of the distant west. He has crushed the great King Darius, and now demands that tribute be paid to him. Possessed by evil spirits, this foreigner wants to dip his steed's hooves in the farthest sea. The hall fell silent. I could see the worry creeping across the faces of my advisors, but I remained calm. In my years as ruler, I had learned that panic was the enemy of wise decision-making. "Be at peace," I said, placing my palm on the traveler's shoulder. I felt the tension in his muscles, the way his body carried the weight of his terrible news. There are no invincible kings in this world. No matter how much one conquers, there is always someone stronger. This king with such a wise name, Alexander, the traveler prompted. "Alexander," I repeated, tasting the foreign syllables. "He is simply an ambitious youth, destined to experience bitter disappointment." I gestured to my servants, who brought forward gifts of gold and provisions for the messenger. As I watched him accept them gratefully, I pondered the implications of his warning. 10 days. Not much time to prepare for what could be the greatest threat our lands had ever faced. After generously rewarding and dismissing the traveler, I turned to my chief advisor, a man I had trusted since my youth. "Cucurava," I called. "Take upon yourself the trouble of informing my brothers Abisares and Taxiles of what the traveler has told us. Explain to them that if we do not unite, the enemy will defeat us one by one, like fire consumes straw. We must deploy our army on the bank of the Hydaspes, at the source of the river. Then the enemy will not be able to cross into our country." My advisor bowed low, his long hair falling forward to shadow his face. "I hear and obey," Cucurava replied. As he lifted his head, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, a brief flash that made me uneasy. But the moment passed so quickly that I convinced myself it was merely a trick of the lamplight. How could I have known that the man I trusted most was already plotting my destruction? Number. I watched Cucurava depart on his mission, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. The unity of the three kingdoms, mine, Abisares, and Taxiles, was our only hope against this Macedonian invader. Little did I know that my most trusted advisor carried seeds of treachery in his heart. Cucurava first visited Abisares, whose kingdom lay on the right bank of the Hydaspes, in the river's upper reaches. I had always known that cowardice was this ruler's primary character trait, but I had hoped that the threat of annihilation might overcome his natural timidity. Instead, Cucurava played upon these very fears. Not only did he relay everything I had told him about the approaching enemy army, but he embellished the account with his own terrifying details. In Cucurava's telling, Alexander became an evil spirit whose very encounter promised inevitable destruction. "Who has seen this enemy?" Abisares mused aloud, his voice quavering with uncertainty. "Some traveler? Perhaps the heat made him dizzy? In clear weather, in pure air, cities with high palaces and towers sometimes appear before the eyes of mortals. But you need only walk a little forward, and they melt away. Perhaps this countless enemy army is the same kind of phantom city." Yes, Cucurava agreed eagerly, though I later learned how he fed Abisares' doubts. This traveler seemed suspicious to me. His eyes gleamed like those of a madman. Suppose the enemy army was moving toward the Hydaspes 10 days ago, Abisaris continued, grasping at these straws of hope. But much could have changed in that time. The commander might have changed his mind and turned back. For example, he might have been frightened by snakes. Yes, Kukurava chimed in. Nowhere are there as many snakes as we have here. From this it follows, Abisaris concluded, that we need not hurry. Let us see what kind of enemy this is and learn of his intentions. How different were the results of Kukurava's meeting with Taxiles, the ruler of the semi-desert regions between the Hydaspes and the Indus. I knew Taxiles to be vain and cruel as a peacock, a man who angered his subjects with taxes and executions while living in constant fear of them. His country swarmed with spies who reported to the king about what people said in their homes and in the squares. Like a dice player, Taxiles daily and hourly gambled away himself, his throne, and his country. Greetings to you, wisest of the wise, Kukurava said, bowing low. My lord has sent me to warn you of terrible danger. I know, Taxiles responded quickly. The guards on the western border have informed me of a great army's approach. What is the enemy commander's purpose? They say he wants to reach the edge of the world. That's all. And then he will return to where he came from, to boast before his subjects. I think so too, Taxiles said, a calculating gleam in his eyes. But I want to ask you, wouldn't it be better to let him pass through our borders? Let him go wherever he wants. You are right, Kukurava replied, though inside he must have been rejoicing at how easily his treachery was taking root. Let him go. But how do we inform him that the path is clear? Very simple, Kukurava answered. You can march out to meet him to conclude a peace treaty with him. You are a wise man, Taxiles exclaimed. If you wish to serve me, you will achieve more than with Porus. Kukurava was delighted, knowing my character. He was certain that I, even when left alone, would still stand against Alexander, and would surely be defeated. With such dark thoughts, Kukurava returned to Vardamana, while Taxiles hastily gathered his army and marched out to meet Alexander. But fate had one more twist in store. In the desert lands, Taxiles' warriors encountered a half-naked Brahmin. Learning where they were going, the priest understood the king's plan and decided to dissuade him from treachery. Tell your master, the Brahmin said to the warriors, that the gods have endowed me with the gift of prophecy, and I have warned many against danger. When Taxiles heard about the Brahmin, he wanted to meet with him. Is it true, teacher, that you know the future? The king asked. The future is known only to the gods. The Brahmin replied, I belong to those who know how to divine with the help of birds, by the sunset, by the stars, who prophesy with beans and roots. I have lived in the forest for many years and know what has happened to its inhabitants. He who has ears will hear, the wise will understand. Speak. I am listening. In one forest, the priest began, a family of lions settled. After the death of the father lion, his lion cubs marked out territories for themselves and hunted without trespassing on others' watering places. But there was no friendship between them, each thought only of himself. And then one day they heard a menacing roar. Come out! Who lives here? The lion cubs cowered. They realized that a tiger had appeared, one stronger than any of them individually. The eldest of the lion brothers, he was the wisest, understood that to defend their domains, they needed to unite. Therefore, he sent a jackal messenger to arrange an alliance. But the jackal was a treacherous beast who realized that if he served the tiger, he would feast on scraps from his table for life. Coming to one of the lion brothers, the jackal convinced him it would be better to give the tiger some deer as prey and not risk his own life. To another lion brother, he advised giving the tiger a pair of gazelles to save himself. It all ended with the eldest brother lion going out against the tiger alone and being killed by him. And then the tiger drove the lion brothers from the forest, one by one. Your parable is not to the point, Taxiles said dismissively. The predator that threatens us simply wants to pass through our domains. The wise will understand, the Brahmin replied, and walked away. Number. As these events unfolded beyond my borders, I remained in Vardamana, making preparations for what I believed would be a united defense. I spent sleepless nights reviewing our military capabilities, studying maps of the Hydaspes region, and consulting with my generals about the best defensive positions. My palace, which had always been a symbol of peace and prosperity, now hummed with the activity of war preparation. Smiths worked day and night forging weapons, while my elephant keepers prepared our most formidable defenders, the war elephants that had served my kingdom faithfully for generations. I often found myself standing on the highest tower of my palace, gazing westward toward the territories of my supposed allies. The horizon remained peaceful, showing no signs of the approaching storm, but I knew that Alexander's reputation for speed meant that calm could shatter in an instant. My trusted elephant, Veritas, whose name meant loyalty, seemed to sense the tension in the air. When I visited the elephant quarters, he would approach me with unusual gentleness, as if trying to offer comfort. This magnificent creature had been my companion in both peace and the few conflicts that had touched our lands. His intelligence surpassed that of many men, and his devotion to me was absolute. My faithful friend, I would whisper to him, stroking his massive head. Soon we may face the greatest test of our lives. The elephant would rumble softly in response, a sound that always calmed my troubled thoughts. Days passed without word from either Cucurava or my supposed allies. This silence began to worry me more than any news of Alexander's advance could have. In warfare, as in life, it is often what we do not know that proves most dangerous. I decided to send my own messengers to verify what was happening. But before they could depart, scouts came racing back from the western borders with news that chilled my blood. "My lord," the lead scout gasped, still breathless from his desperate ride. "We have seen them with our own eyes. The army of Alexander approaches like a dark cloud across the land. Their numbers are beyond counting, and their advance as swift as the wind." "What of our allies?" I demanded. "What word from Abisares and Taxiles?" The scout's face grew grim. "My lord, we saw Taxiles' banners, but they march alongside the invaders." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Taxiles abandoned our alliance, but he had joined our enemies. The implications were staggering. Alexander would now have local knowledge of our lands, our strengths, and our weaknesses. "And Abisares?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "No sign of his forces, my lord. His territories appear undefended, as if he has withdrawn entirely from the conflict." I dismissed the scouts and stood alone in my chamber, the weight of isolation settling upon my shoulders. The unity I had counted on had crumbled before the enemy had even reached our borders. I was truly alone against the most formidable military force the world had ever seen. But as I contemplated this dire situation, something unexpected happened within my heart. Instead of despair, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Without allies to coordinate with or protect, I could make decisions based solely on honor and duty. I would defend my people and my land with every resource at my disposal, regardless of the odds. I called for my armor-bearer and my chief general. If I was to face Alexander alone, then I would meet him as a true king should, with courage, dignity, and unwavering resolve. The time for diplomacy had ended. The time for loyalty, true loyalty, had begun. Part 2, Chapter 4, The Traitor's Return. When Cucurava returned to Vardamana, I awaited his report eagerly, hoping to hear of successful alliances and coordinated defense plans. Instead, what I received was a masterpiece of deception wrapped in the language of loyalty. "My lord," Cucurava said, approaching my throne with his characteristic bow, "I have completed the mission you entrusted to me." "Tell me of our allies," I said, leaning forward with anticipation. "Are Abisares and Taxiles prepared to unite our forces?" Cucurava's expression grew troubled, or so it appeared to me then. Now, looking back with the bitter wisdom that comes from betrayal, I recognized that every gesture was calculated. "Abisares received your message with great interest," he began carefully. "However, he wishes to verify the threat before committing his forces. He suggests watching the enemy's movements for several more days. A chill ran through me. And Taxiles, he also showed. Caution, my lord. He believes it might be wiser to negotiate rather than fight immediately. Even as Kukurava spoke these words, I sensed that something was wrong. The man who had served me faithfully for years seemed different. Somehow his eyes held a gleam I had never noticed before, and his manner, while outwardly respectful, carried an undercurrent of something I could not identify. You seem troubled, Kukurava, I observed. Speak plainly. What did you truly find in your journey? For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt cross his features, but then he straightened and met my gaze directly. My lord, I fear your allies may not prove as reliable as we hoped, but this does not mean all is lost. Perhaps it would be wise to consider other options. What other options? Negotiation, my lord. If this Alexander truly seeks only to reach the edge of the world, why not allow him passage? Many great kings have found that strategic retreat can be wiser than hopeless battle. These words struck me like a physical blow. Here was my most trusted advisor suggesting that I abandon my duty, my people, my honor, everything that made me who I was. I stood slowly from my throne, my hand instinctively moving to the hilt of my sword. Not because I intended violence against Kukurava, not yet, but because his words had awakened something fierce and unyielding within me. You suggest I flee? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Kukurava must have heard the warning in my tone, for he quickly raised his hands in a placating gesture. Not flee, my lord. Strategic withdrawal. Live to fight another day when the odds are more favorable. And my people? What becomes of them under the rule of this foreign conqueror? They will adapt, as people always do. Better to rule a reduced kingdom than to die for a lost cause. In that moment, I saw Kukurava clearly for the first time. The man I had trusted, the advisor I had relied upon, was nothing more than a coward and a schemer. Worse than that, he was actively working to ensure my destruction. Leave me, I commanded. I must think. Kukurava bowed and departed, but not before I caught another glimpse of that strange gleam in his eyes. He was pleased with himself, I realized. Whatever game he was playing, he believed he was winning. Chapter 5. The Reality of Betrayal. Alone in my chamber, I grappled with the terrible truth that was slowly revealing itself. The silence from my allies, Kukurava's suspicious behavior, and the scouts' reports of Taxiles marching with Alexander. All these pieces formed a picture I had been too trusting to see. I was not facing external enemies alone. I had been betrayed from within. The very alliances I had counted on had been poisoned by treachery, and the man I trusted most had likely orchestrated the entire deception. My first impulse was rage, a burning desire to summon my guards and have Kukurava seized immediately. But I forced myself to think strategically. If I acted too hastily, I might lose the chance to understand the full extent of the plot against me. Better to let the traitor believe his deception had succeeded. While I prepared for the reality of standing alone, I called for my elephant keeper, an old man who had served my family since before my birth. His loyalty was beyond question, and his wisdom in matters of war was considerable. Mahout, I said when he arrived, I need you to prepare Viratas for battle. Full armor, but do so quietly. Let no one else know of these preparations. He had anticipated this moment. I realized perhaps he had seen signs that my younger, more trusting eyes had missed. How many days do we have, my lord? Perhaps 3, perhaps less. The enemy approaches, and we will meet them alone. Alone, my lord. Our allies have proven to be enemies, and our most trusted advisor serves another master. It will be just us, our city, our people, and our honor. The old Mahout nodded grimly. Then we will fight as our fathers did, and their fathers before them. Viratas is ready, my lord. He has always been ready. That night, I could not sleep. I walked the ramparts of my palace, looking out over the city I had sworn to protect. Vardamana spread below me like a jewel, its white stone walls gleaming in the moonlight. The people slept peacefully, trusting in their king to keep them safe. I thought of all the kings throughout history, who had faced impossible odds. Some had fled, preserving their lives but losing their honor. Others had fought and died, but their names lived on in the songs of their people. I knew which path I would choose. As dawn approached, I made my final preparations. I donned my finest armor not out of vanity, but because if I was to die, I would die as a king should. I checked my weapons, spoke with my generals about defensive positions, and made arrangements for the city's protection, should the worst occur. Most importantly, I went to the elephant quarters and spoke with Veritas one final time before the battle. "My faithful friend," I said, stroking his massive head. "Tomorrow we face a test that will determine not just our fate, but what history remembers of us. I ask not that you sacrifice yourself for me, but that you help me stand firm when all others have abandoned honor." Veritas rumbled softly and touched my shoulder with his trunk, a gesture of understanding and commitment that spoke more clearly than any human words could have. As I returned to my palace, I found a message waiting for me. Scouts reported that Alexander's army had reached the banks of the Hydaspes. The time for preparation was over. Chapter 6. The Arrival of Alexander. The morning sun revealed a sight that would have broken the spirit of a lesser man. Across the Hydaspes River, stretching as far as the eye could see, was the most formidable military force I had ever witnessed. Alexander's army covered the opposite bank like a dark sea, their bronze shields and spear points glittering in the dawn light. I stood with my generals on the walls of Vardamana, studying our enemy through the clear morning air. Even from this distance, the organization and discipline of the Macedonian forces was evident. These were not raiders or opportunistic invaders. This was a war machine honed by years of conquest. "How many do you estimate?" I asked my chief general. "Difficult to say with certainty, my lord. Perhaps 30,000 infantry, maybe 8,000 cavalry. And," he paused, "they have siege engines." Indeed. I could see the massive catapults and battering rams that had broken down the walls of cities far greater than Vardamana. But more concerning than their numbers or equipment was their evident confidence. They made no attempt to hide their strength or disguise their intentions. Alexander wanted us to see exactly what we faced. "My lord," one of my younger generals said hesitantly, "perhaps it is not too late to negotiate. Surely Alexander would accept tribute in exchange for passage." I turned to look at the young man, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, yet already showing the caution that would make him either a wise leader or a living coward. "And what tribute would satisfy a man who has conquered the Persian Empire?" I asked quietly. "What price would buy the freedom of our people? Our independence? Our honor?" The general had no answer, because there was no answer. Men like Alexander were not satisfied with gold or jewels. They wanted submission, domination, the complete surrender of everything that made a people who they were. A commotion at the palace gates interrupted my thoughts. Guards were escorting a small group of riders toward the main courtyard. Even from the walls, I could see that one of them flew the banners of Taxiles. "Shall we receive them, my lord?" my captain asked. "Yes," I replied grimly. "Let us hear what traitors have to say for themselves." When I descended to the courtyard, I found not Taxiles himself, but one of his senior generals, a man I had known since childhood, who had often visited our court in peaceful times. The sight of him now, wearing Macedonian insignia alongside his own, filled me with a sadness that cut deeper than any blade. "King Porus," the general said, though he did not bow as protocol demanded. "I come bearing an offer from the great Alexander." "Speak your offer," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Alexander acknowledges your reputation as a wise and brave king. He offers you the opportunity to join his campaign as an ally. Your kingdom would remain intact. Your people would be protected, and you would share in the glory of his conquest of the world." The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. Around me, I could hear my own generals shifting restlessly. Some, I realized with growing horror, were actually considering this proposal. "And if I refuse?" I asked. "Then Alexander will be forced to treat you as an enemy. Your city will fall, your people will suffer, and your name will be forgotten. But it need not come to that. Taxiles has found great honor in serving Alexander. You could do the same. I looked at this man who'd once been a friend, who had eaten at my table and sworn oaths of brotherhood with my family. Taxiles had clearly sent him precisely because of our past relationship, hoping that personal affection might succeed where strategic arguments would fail. Tell your new master this, I said finally. A king who abandons his duty ceases to be a king. A man who betrays his people ceases to be a man. I will defend my kingdom with my life, and if the gods will it that I die in that defense, then I will die as I lived free. The general's face showed genuine sadness. Porus, please. King Porus, I corrected sharply, and our audience is concluded. As the delegation departed, carrying my refusal back to Alexander, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The die was cast. There would be no more negotiations, no more diplomatic maneuvering, no more hope of avoiding the inevitable confrontation. For better or worse, tomorrow would bring battle. Loyalty. Part 3. Chapter 7. The Crossing. I spent the night before battle in solitary meditation. The weight of kingship had never felt heavier than in those dark hours before dawn. Every decision I had made, every choice that had led to this moment, passed through my consciousness like a river of memory. When morning came, I armed myself carefully, checking each piece of my battle gear with the attention of a craftsman examining his finest work. If today was to be my last day on Earth, I would meet it properly prepared. The reports from my scouts confirmed what I had feared during the night. Alexander had managed to cross the Hydaspes upstream from our position. His reputation for tactical brilliance was evidently well-deserved. While we had watched his main force across the river, he had secretly moved the bulk of his army to a crossing point hidden by forest and an island in the middle of the stream. He has perhaps 5,000 men across already, my chief scout reported breathlessly. More are crossing as we speak. I nodded grimly. Alexander had outmaneuvered us before the battle had even begun, but this did not mean all was lost. If anything, it simplified my choices. Instead of trying to defend the river crossing, I could meet him on open ground, where my elephants would have their greatest advantage. Summon the war council, I commanded. We marched to meet them. Within an hour, my army was assembled. 85 war elephants formed the centerpiece of our force, their massive forms inspiring confidence in my soldiers. Behind them stood 300 war chariots, their bronze fittings gleaming in the morning, Sunday. My infantry, armed with the great bows that could only be drawn when braced against the ground, filled out the ranks. As I mounted Viritas, I felt the familiar comfort of his steady strength beneath me. The elephant tower on his back had been designed for 3 archers, but today I would occupy it alone. This symbolic gesture was not lost on my men. Their king would fight with the strength of 3 warriors, compensating for the allies who had abandoned us. We march to battle, I called out to my assembled forces. Today we show the world what it means to be free men, what it means to defend our homeland with honor. The responding cheer echoed across the plain like thunder. Whatever the outcome of this day, my warriors would not be able to say their king lacked courage. Chapter 8. The battle begins. The 2 armies met on a plain beside the Hydaspes, with the river at Alexander's back, and the open ground stretching endlessly before us. I had never seen a more magnificent or terrifying sight than the Macedonian phalanx, those bronze shields locked together, the forest of spear points bristling like the quills of some enormous beast. At their head rode Alexander himself, unmistakable even at distance. His golden hair caught the morning light, and he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who had never known defeat. As I watched him survey our forces, I wondered what thoughts passed through his mind. Did he see us as just another obstacle to be overcome? Or did he sense that today would be different from his previous conquests? I lifted my great bow, a weapon so large that most men could not even draw it, and placed an arrow against the string. The shot I was about to take would serve 2 purposes. It would signal the beginning of our attack, and it would show Alexander and his men exactly what they faced. Drawing the bowstring to my ear, I aimed not at any specific target, but at the center of the Macedonian formation. When I released, The arrow flew with such force that it seemed to cut the very air. Even at this distance, I could see the enemy soldiers flinch as the shaft buried itself in the ground among them. That single shot was the signal my entire army had been waiting for. The war chariots began to move, their bronze fittings jangling as they picked up speed. The banners attached to them depicting elephants, lions, tigers, wild bulls, monkeys, and serpents snapped in the wind like living things. It was as if the entire animal kingdom of India marched with us into battle. But then disaster struck. The previous day's storm had turned the ground treacherous, and our chariots, magnificent as they looked, began to founder. Some horses broke away from their formations. Others stumbled on the slick earth. Still others were pulled sideways by their struggling teammates. Our most mobile force was being neutralized before it could even engage the enemy. Alexander, veteran of 100 battles, immediately recognized the opportunity. His light infantry moved left around our faltering chariots, while his heavy cavalry swung right. He was attempting to strike us from both flanks while our forces were in disarray. I watched this tactical masterpiece unfold with a mixture of admiration and dread. This was why Alexander had conquered half the world. He could read a battlefield like a scholar reads a book, instantly understanding every advantage and weakness. But I had not survived this long as a king by accepting defeat easily. Notching another arrow, I took careful aim at the Macedonian cavalry commander and let fly. The shaft took him cleanly from his horse, and immediately, the enemy charge lost some of its coordination. This was the signal for my elephants to advance. Led by Viratas, they formed a line with archers and spearmen filling the gaps between them. From a distance, our formation must have looked like a moving fortress wall, bristling with weapons and seemingly unstoppable. The effect on the Macedonian infantry was immediate and dramatic. These men had faced Persians, Scythians, and a dozen other enemies, but none had ever charged them behind a wall of war elephants. The front ranks of their famous phalanx wavered and broke, soldiers scattering in all directions as the massive beasts bore down on them. For a moment, I dared to hope we might achieve the impossible, that the great Alexander might taste defeat for the first time in his life. Chapter 9. The Tide Turns. The initial success of our elephant charge was glorious to behold. Macedonian soldiers, some of them veterans of campaigns across half the known world, fled before our advance, like children running from monsters. The trumpeting of the elephants, the crash of their footsteps, and the whir of arrows from the towers on their backs created a symphony of terror that seemed to paralyze our enemies. I continued to shoot from Viratas's back, each arrow finding its mark among the confused Macedonian ranks. My aim had never been truer. Driven by the desperate energy that comes only when fighting for one's homeland and honor, each shaft that flew from my bow carried with it the hopes of my people and the fury of a betrayed king. But Alexander had not conquered most of the known world by accepting defeat at the first setback. As I watched, a new unit of soldiers appeared from behind his main force men, armed with curved swords and moving with the fluid grace of trained killers. These warriors, who I later learned were Bactrians, had clearly been briefed on fighting elephants. Instead of trying to attack the massive beasts head-on, they darted in like wolves, slashing at trunks and legs with their curved blades. The elephants, maddened by pain and the smell of their own blood, began to panic. What happened next was a nightmare that would haunt my memories forever. The wounded elephants, no longer under their mahout's control, turned and fled back toward our own lines. In their terror and agony, they trampled the very soldiers they had been meant to protect. The ordered ranks of my infantry dissolved into chaos as men scattered to avoid the rampaging beasts. Only Viratas remained steady, perhaps sensing that his king's honor depended on standing firm. From his back, I continued to rain arrows on our enemies, but now we stood almost alone on a battlefield that had been transformed from triumph to disaster in a matter of minutes. I could see Alexander himself now, pushing forward through the confusion with a small group of his elite companions. His golden hair was dark with sweat, and his armor bore the dents and scratches of close combat, but his eyes blazed with the fierce joy of a born warrior who has found a worthy opponent. "Surrender, King of India," he called out in Greek, though I could not understand the words then. His meaning, however, was clear enough from his tone and gestures. I responded by putting another arrow to my bowstring. My hands were steady despite the chaos around us. My aim as true as it had been at the battle's start. The shaft flew straight toward Alexander's heart, but at the last instant, one of his companions threw himself in the way, taking the arrow meant for his king. This act of loyalty, enemy though he was, struck me with unexpected force. Here was a man so devoted to his leader that he would die without hesitation to preserve him. It reminded me of the loyalty I had hoped to find among my allies, the trust I had placed in Cucurava, the bonds that should have united us against this foreign invader. But there was no time for such reflections. More Bactrian swordsmen were approaching Viratas, their curved blades ready to cripple my faithful companion, as they had so many others. I dropped my bow and drew my sword, preparing for close combat. Chapter 10. The Final Stand. As the Bactrian warriors closed in around us, I felt a strange calm descend over my mind. This was the moment every king must eventually face the test that separates those who truly deserve the crown from those who merely wear it by accident of birth. I had already been wounded several times, arrows having found gaps in my armor, but adrenaline and determination kept me fighting. Blood ran down my arms and chest, making my grip on sword and reins slippery. But my will remained unbroken. Viratas fought with the intelligence and courage that had made him legendary among elephant warriors. His trunk lashed out like a giant whip, sending enemies flying through the air. His tusks, sharpened and fitted with bronze points, were like spears in the hands of a master warrior. Together, we carved a circle of devastation around ourselves, making the enemy pay dearly for every step they took toward us. But courage alone cannot overcome impossible odds forever. I was one man on one elephant, facing the finest army in the world. Gradually, inevitably, the wounds began to take their toll. My vision blurred from loss of blood, and my sword arm grew heavy as lead. It was then that I heard a familiar voice calling my name. Through the haze of battle, I saw Cucurava approaching on horseback, still wearing the insignia of my service, but now accompanied by Macedonian soldiers. "My king!" he called out, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. "Alexander offers terms. Surrender now, and live." Even in my weakened state, the sight of my former advisor filled me with rage that burned away the fog of exhaustion. Here was the architect of my downfall, the man whose treachery had left me to face this battle alone, now offering me the mercy of my enemies. I reached for my last arrow, a shaft I had been saving for the most crucial moment of the battle. My hands shook as I fitted it to the bowstring. But my purpose was clear. If I was to die this day, I would at least take the traitor with me. Cucurava saw my intention and tried to wheel his horse away, but he was too late. The arrow, carrying all my remaining strength and every ounce of my fury at his betrayal, took him in the chest and hurled him from his saddle. As he fell, I heard myself speak words that would later be repeated in songs throughout India. "When death stands before you, give your kingdom to your son. Embrace your wife, but kill your enemy with your last arrow." The effort of that final shot was too much for my wounded body. I swayed in the elephant tower, darkness closing in around the edges of my vision. I felt myself beginning to fall, but then Viratas, my faithful companion, knelt down so that I would not be injured by the fall. As consciousness faded, I was dimly aware of Alexander himself, approaching his face a mixture of respect and something that might have been regret. The great conqueror had won his victory, but at a cost that seemed to have moved even his warrior's heart. The last thing I remembered was Viratas's trunk gently lifting me, trying even in his own mortal agony to protect the master he had served so faithfully. Then darkness claimed me, and I knew no more of that terrible day. Loyalty. Part 4. Final. Chapter 11. The Awakening. I do not know how long I remained in darkness. Time became meaningless. A river, without banks or direction. Sometimes I thought I could hear voices, Alexander's clear Greek tones, the concerned murmurs of physicians, the distant sounds of an army making camp. But all of it seemed to come from very far away, as if I were listening from the bottom of a deep well. Gradually, awareness returned to me. I became conscious first of pain, a deep, throbbing ache that seemed to permeate every fiber of my being. Then came the realization that I was lying on something soft, in a place that smelled of medicinal herbs, rather than blood and death. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I found myself in a tent I did not recognize. The fabric was fine quality, dyed in rich purples and gold, clearly belonging to someone of high rank. For a moment, I wondered if I had somehow been taken prisoner by one of my own nobles. But then I saw the Macedonian armor and weapons arranged carefully near the entrance. "You are awake." The voice came from my left, and I turned my head slowly to see Alexander himself sitting on a camp stool beside my bed. The great conqueror looked different than he had on the battlefield. Younger somehow, though weariness lined his face. His golden hair was no longer wild with battle fury but carefully arranged, and his blue eyes held an expression I could not quite identify. "You are Alexander," I managed to say, my voice coming out as little more than a raspy whisper. He nodded. "I am, and you are King Porus of Vardamana, though your city now flies both our banners." The words hit me like physical blows. My city had fallen. My people were now subjects of a foreign conqueror. Everything I had fought to prevent had come to pass. "My people," I began, trying to sit up despite the agony it caused. "What have you?" "They are unharmed," Alexander interrupted, raising a hand to stop my movement. "My physician says you must rest if you wish to live. And yes, before you ask, your elephant survived as well, though his wounds were nearly as severe as your own." This news brought me more comfort than I could express. That Varadas lived, that my people were safe, these things mattered more than my own fate. "Why?" I asked simply. Alexander seemed to understand my question without further explanation. "Because yesterday I witnessed something I have rarely seen in all my campaigns, true loyalty. Not the loyalty bought with gold or enforced through fear, but the devotion that comes from honor and love." He stood and walked to the tent's entrance, gazing out at something I could not see. "Your elephant nearly died trying to protect you, even as his own life flowed away. Your soldiers, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, fought to the last man, rather than abandon their king. And you..." He turned back to me. "You chose to face impossible odds rather than betray your duty." "I lost," I said bitterly. "You lost a battle," Alexander corrected. "But you won something more valuable. You proved that there are still men in this world who value honor above life itself." Chapter 12. The Unexpected Offer. Over the following days, as my strength slowly returned, Alexander visited me frequently. Our conversations ranged over many topics: philosophy, kingship, the nature of conquest, and the duties that rulers owe to their subjects. I found myself surprised by the depth of his thinking and the genuine respect he showed for concepts of honor and loyalty. "Tell me," he said during one such visit, "what did you think when you realized your allies had abandoned you?" I considered this carefully before answering. "At first, betrayal, then anger, but finally, relief." Relief? When I could no longer rely on others, I was free to act according to my own conscience. There were no more compromises to make, no more diplomatic considerations. I could simply do what was right. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "I have often envied men who possess such clarity. When you command an empire, every decision affects thousands of lives. The weight of that responsibility can be crushing. Is that why you continue to conquer new lands? To avoid the burden of ruling what you already possess?" The question was perhaps too bold for a captive to ask his captor, but Alexander only smiled. "You see more than most men, King Porus." "Yes, there is truth in what you say. It is easier to win an empire than to govern one wisely." On the 5th day of my recovery, Alexander made an offer that left me speechless. "I want you to continue ruling your kingdom," he said without preamble, "as my ally and friend, not as a conquered subject. Your people need you, and I need men of honor in positions of authority." I stared at him in disbelief. "You would trust a man who fought against you to the death?" "I would trust a man who fought for his people to the death," Alexander corrected. Loyalty to one's duty is a quality I value above all others. Besides, he added with a slight smile, who better to govern Indian territories than an Indian king who has proven his worth? And what of Taxiles and Abyssaris? What becomes of the traitors? Alexander's expression hardened. Taxiles has been useful, but usefulness and trustworthiness are different things. As for Abyssaris, his cowardice has already cost him most of his territory. I prefer to work with men of proven courage. The offer was generous beyond anything I had dared hope for. Not only would I live, but I could continue to serve my people, protecting them from the worst excesses that often accompanied foreign conquest. But there was one question that still burned in my heart. What of my advisor, Kukurava? Alexander's face grew grave. He died from the wound you gave him, but not before confessing the full extent of his treachery. He was the one who convinced both Taxiles and Abyssaris to abandon you. Apparently, he had made secret agreements with multiple parties, hoping to profit regardless of the outcome. The news of Kukurava's confession brought me no satisfaction, only sadness for the waste of it all. How different things might have been if he had remained true to his oaths. Chapter 13. The New Beginning. 2 weeks later, I was strong enough to stand and walk without assistance. Alexander had arranged for a formal ceremony to mark our new alliance. But before that public event, he granted me a private request to visit Viratas. My faithful elephant was being tended in a special enclosure, his wounds carefully bandaged and healing well. When he saw me approaching, he rumbled softly and extended his trunk to touch my face, a gesture of recognition and affection that brought tears to my eyes. He has been asking for you, the elephant keeper said. Each day he grows more restless, as if he knows you are near but cannot find you. I spent an hour with Viratas, stroking his massive head, and speaking softly to him about the strange turns our lives had taken. He listened with the patience and understanding that had always marked his character, occasionally rumbling in what I chose to interpret as agreement. That afternoon, in the main square of Vardhamana, Alexander and I appeared together before my people. The crowd was wary at first, unsure what this gathering might mean for their future. But when Alexander publicly declared his intention to restore me to my throne and granted additional territories taken from the treacherous allies, their relief was palpable. King Porus has shown me what true leadership means, Alexander announced to the assembled multitude. He fought not for personal glory or gain, but for the welfare of his subjects. Such a man deserves not conquest, but partnership. In that moment, as I looked out over the faces of my people, seeing hope replace fear, trust begin to overcome suspicion, I realized that sometimes what appears to be the greatest defeat can become the foundation for something better. The ceremony concluded, with Alexander and me exchanging gifts and oaths of friendship. As we did so, I thought of the Brahmin's parable about the lions who were destroyed by their inability to unite against a common threat. Perhaps there was wisdom in learning when to stand together with former enemies against greater dangers that might yet come. Epilogue. The meaning of loyalty. Years have passed since that day beside the Hydaspes. Alexander continued his march toward the edge of the world, but died before achieving that impossible dream. His empire fragmented among his generals, but the friendship he and I forged endured until his death. I ruled my expanded kingdom for many more years, always striving to embody the principles that had guided me through that terrible test. I kept faith with Alexander's trust, governing justly and maintaining the peace he had established in our region. Viratas lived to a great age for an elephant, remaining my companion and advisor until his peaceful death in the palace gardens. I had a monument erected in his honor, inscribed with the words, "Here lies loyalty itself, whose faithfulness surpassed that of men." As for the lessons of those dark days, they are simple but profound. True loyalty cannot be bought, bargained for, or coerced. It must be earned through one's own actions and character. A king who expects loyalty from others must first demonstrate it himself toward his people, his principles, and his duties. The betrayal of Kukurava, painful as it was, taught me to judge men not by their words but by their deeds, not by their promises but by their choices. When those promises are tested, and Alexander's unexpected generosity showed me that even enemies can become allies when they recognize honor in one another. In the end, the battle beside the Hydaspes was not really about territory or conquest. It was about what kind of men we chose to be when everything we valued was at stake. On that day, I learned that victory and defeat are not always what they seem, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. The songs still tell of that day, and the bards still sing of the loyalty between a king and his elephant. But the true meaning of the story lies not in the battle itself, but in the choice each of us must make when our deepest principles are tested by the storms of life. Will we stand firm, as Veritas did, faithful to the end, or will we bend like reeds, hoping to survive by abandoning what makes us who we are? That choice, and how we answer it, defines not just our own fate, but the legacy we leave for those who come after us. Thus ends the tale of King Porus, and the loyalty that endured beyond defeat, beyond death, beyond the ending of the age itself.